They say the fall of a dictator brings justice, but for Saddam Hussein's wives, his execution on December 30th, 2006 unleashed something far more merciless than any trial could deliver. While the world watched the tyrant's body drop through the gallows, two women sat in the shadows of exile, their own fates hanging in the balance in ways that would shock even those who thought they knew everything about the regime's inner circle. These were women who had walked the marble halls of presidential palaces, worn jewelry worth millions, and commanded fear with a mere glance. Before we can understand the devastating aftermath that shattered their golden cages, we must first understand the brutal reality of what it meant to be bound to the most feared man in the Middle East. The execution that changed everything happened at 6:05 in the morning as the first call to prayer echoed across Baghdad. The rope snapped taut, and in that instant, the invisible shield that had protected Saddam Hussein and Samira Shabandar for decades simply vanished. While crowds celebrated in the streets and news anchors announced the end of a tyrant, two women thousands of miles away felt the ground disappear beneath their feet. They had lived as untouchables, wives of the most feared man in the Middle East, surrounded by bodyguards, insulated by power that seemed eternal. But power, as they would discover, dies the moment its source stops breathing. The presidential accounts froze. The network of loyalists scattered like smoke. The diplomatic protections that had kept them safe in exile suddenly meant nothing. In Jordan and Qatar, where they had taken refuge, the phones stopped ringing. The visitors stopped coming. And the brutal reality set in. They were now completely, utterly alone. Two wives, two powers, one rooted in bloodlines, the other built on beauty. Saddam Hussein had been Saddam's first choice, married in 1963 when he was still a rising revolutionary with dirt under his fingernails and ambition burning in his eyes. She was his cousin, a binding of tribal tradition that strengthened his grip on the Tikriti clan that would become his power base. She bore him two sons and three daughters, gave him legitimacy, and stood as the face of traditional Iraqi womanhood. Modest, loyal, connected to the old ways that still commanded respect in the provinces. Samira Shabandar represented everything Sajida was not. Educated, sophisticated, fluent in English, she had been the wife of an Iraqi Airways director before Saddam's obsession tore her from that life in 1986. Their affair became an open secret, a scandal whispered about in Baghdad's cafes. She was his trophy, his claim to modernity, the woman who could navigate diplomatic receptions and speak the language of the West he both envied and despised. The rivalry between them was as complex and brutal as Saddam's political reign. One wife held blood and tradition, the other held passion and image. Neither held freedom. And when Saddam's empire crumbled, both would discover that their different forms of power meant absolutely nothing in exile. The Great Escape began in March of 2003, as American bombs turned Baghdad's night sky into daylight and the regime's foundations cracked like ancient stone. Sajida fled first, racing across the border into Jordan with whatever jewelry and cash she could carry, her children scattered to different safe houses, the presidential convoy reduced to a single armored Mercedes. She believed it was temporary, a strategic retreat until Saddam's forces regrouped and pushed back the invaders. The delusion of return kept her sane during those first chaotic weeks. Samira's flight came days later, slipping into Qatar under diplomatic cover that would soon prove worthless. She had always been the adaptable one, the survivor who could reinvent herself. But adaptation requires resources, and resources require access to the frozen billions that Saddam had hidden in accounts across the Middle East and Europe. Neither woman understood the finality of their departure. They packed as if for a vacation, not a permanent exile. They called contacts who no longer answered. They waited for instructions from a command structure that had already dissolved into smoke and sand. The network that had protected them, built on fear, loyalty, and Saddam's iron grip, collapsed the moment American tanks rolled through Baghdad's streets. Their golden cages had shattered, and they didn't even realize they were now completely exposed. When protection becomes prison, The transformation happens so gradually that the captive doesn't notice until the walls have already closed in. After Saddam's execution, Sajida found herself confined to a villa in Doha, Qatar, technically free, practically imprisoned. The Qatari government had granted her asylum, but asylum came with conditions. Intelligence agents monitored her phone calls. Her movements required approval. The woman who had once commanded palaces now needed permission to visit a grocery store. The surveillance was constant, suffocating. Every conversation recorded, every visitor logged, every transaction scrutinized. She lived in a gilded apartment that felt smaller each day, the walls pressing closer as the years dragged on. The jewelry she had smuggled out of Iraq, diamonds, emeralds, gold pieces worth hundreds of thousands, slowly disappeared, sold piece by piece to pay for basic necessities as Saddam's frozen assets remained permanently out of reach. Samira's prison in Jordan operated under different rules but delivered the same slow suffocation. The Jordanian government tolerated her presence but offered no protection from the death threats that arrived weekly. She moved between safe houses, never staying long enough to feel settled, always looking over her shoulder. The educated, sophisticated woman who had once charmed diplomats now lived like a fugitive. Her name, a liability she couldn't escape. Both women discovered that exile strips away more than geography. It strips away identity, purpose, dignity. They had been defined entirely by their proximity to power, and when that power evaporated, they became ghosts haunting the margins of Middle Eastern society. The protection they had once taken for granted transformed into a different kind of cage, one with invisible bars but absolute control. The inherited curse passed from father to children like a genetic disease. Invisible, inescapable, absolutely devastating. Sajida's daughters and Samira's son discovered that Saddam's bloodline had become a mark of Cain in the modern world. They carried his DNA, and that biological connection sentenced them to a lifetime of punishment for crimes they never committed. Raghad and Rana, Sajida's daughters living in Jordan, found themselves stateless, their Iraqi citizenship revoked, their applications for asylum rejected by nation after nation. They existed in legal limbo, unable to work, unable to travel, unable to build lives beyond the shadows of their father's atrocities. Ali, Samira's son, faced similar isolation. Universities rejected his applications. Employers refused to hire him. Potential friends disappeared when they learned his last name. The sins of the father had transferred completely to the children, a generational punishment that violated every principle of individual justice, but operated with brutal efficiency nonetheless. Erased from history, that became the final fate of Saddam Hussein's wives, their endings as obscured as their exiled lives had been. Sajida Talfa died in 2018 in Doha, the exact circumstances shrouded in official silence. No obituary appeared in major newspapers, no public funeral marked her passing. The woman who had walked marble halls and worn jewelry worth millions disappeared from the world with barely a whisper, her death announced weeks later through unconfirmed reports and government leaks. Samira Shabandar's fate remains even more mysterious. Some reports claim she died in Beirut. Others insist she lives still, hidden under an assumed name. Her beauty faded, her past buried under layers of deliberate obscurity. Their stories raise uncomfortable questions about justice and vengeance. They stood beside evil, benefited from brutality, lived in luxury built on suffering. But their punishment, exile, poverty, erasure, the curse passed to innocent children, reveals how easily justice transforms into cruelty, how the desire for accountability becomes indistinguishable from revenge.